Let's jump into our next section of our study, and we've been following the teachings of our Master Jesus as really the rails for the train, so to speak, and trying to see what are the marks of being mature. Now, this is helpful in several ways. One, it gives us the picture of who we're becoming. Two, it gives us the markers to show us the progress we're making. And we are making progress. You know, all of us can look at things Jesus is teaching and say, all right, I've made progress in that area. Okay, there's an area I need to make a lot of progress or whatever. But it gives us this gauge. Where are we? Where are we headed? And so I'm glad someone brought up this question of what are the marks of maturity, because without that, have you ever felt like you've just been drifting as a disciple of Jesus or a Christian? You knew you were okay, but you didn't really know where you're headed or where to go next. And so these kinds of things are very helpful for that. And I'm very eager to look at this next part with you because it is such a big part of our lives in the culture we live in, where there is not agreement on what's right. There's not agreement on the way things ought to go. Whether it's political, what the government ought to do, or it's religious, what's right and wrong for individuals. So Jesus is teaching here, as well as what we're going to, maybe, if time allows, poke into some other parts of the New Testament. It's going to help, I think, really help shape how we handle a lot of these issues. So to start, let's just read what the Master said. Would somebody read Matthew 7, verses 1 through 6?
Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and then turn and tear you to pieces.
All right, thank you. Now, one of the reasons this text is so important to actually look at carefully is it actually seems very contradictory, not only within itself, but other places in the Scriptures. So what we want to do is look at this with an eye for the context of what Jesus is saying. What is he saying? What is he not saying? And try to overlay it with other things we know in other Scriptures so that we can really get a fix on what he's talking about. Now, if you just take the very first verse and the very first statement, do not judge or you'll be judged. On the one hand, it seems pretty simple. Okay, I don't make judgments now. I'm not that person. I'm not going to be judgmental at all. But then you read other Scriptures and you find out, oh shoot, in order to be mature, I have to be someone who makes good judgments. Dang it, what are you talking about, Jesus? And so if you look at the context in the next verse, verse 2, he's not saying don't make any judgments about anything. Specifically, what is he saying do not make judgments about? Others, right? Don't judge others, because as you judge others, the same measure is applied to you when you're judged. Now, there's an interesting question here that he does not really answer specifically. When he says, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, who does he have in mind judging you? Is he talking about others judging you or God judging you?
God.
He doesn't say, right? So you kind of have to assume what he means. Now, of course, the whole Jewish understanding of the world is that God is the judge. That's all the way through, right? So it's a pretty safe assumption. Jesus knows his audience knows that God's going to judge. On the other hand, if you take it to a human level, does it work too?
Yeah, because if people know that you're talking and being rude towards others, they judge you. Like, she's supposed to be a Christian, but, and they take that to their own defense, don't you think? Like,
oh, yeah.
That's the way it is. I don't want to be a Christian.
Uh-huh.
That's how some people that I've listening. That's how I feel.
Yeah, see, as soon as you set up a standard that you judge others, people throw it right back in your face. I've experienced that. Oh, some Christian you are, And it usually wasn't about big or important things. It was just they look for any reason to kick you down a notch if they think you're getting big for your britches. And the other thing is, the standard I don't think Jesus is talking about in verse 2, I don't think it's just the rules you're using to judge. It's also how harshly or how lenient you offer judgment. If you're someone that kind of gives people the benefit of the doubt, you don't like to jump to conclusions too quickly about what they did, and they know that about you, aren't they people more likely to give you a little room when there's any room for doubt? But if you're someone that immediately assumes the worst, and you gossip about it, you heard a little tidbit and you created the rest of the scenario and you passed it on to others, oh my gosh, people are going to be so harsh with you when they judge. They're not going to give you any wiggle room at all. And that's true. Now, it shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't just reciprocate whatever people do to us, we'll do it back to them. But that is how people are. And so I think it actually works both ways, both in the divine judgment as well as in human judgment. Jesus is saying, watch out. Good morning, my love.
Good morning.
So that's what I have as the first bullet point here on your paper. Jesus is teaching us to judge. Now, again, he said don't judge. But I think the heart of when he says don't judge is he's saying judge hesitantly. Be careful about this judgment thing. In fact, as he indicates, more often than not, you shouldn't be judging at all when it comes to other people. Because you know that the same standard will be used in judging you. And I get the feeling if we really took him seriously here, because divine judgment as well as human judgment will be thrown at us the way we throw it at others, I think we would really stop and consider, is it worth sticking my neck out to judge someone about this? And most of the time we'd probably think, this is not a big enough deal for me to stick my neck out. This isn't worth it. And if you consider the ways we judge people, most of the time, they're not important issues. They're just pet peeves or nitpicking. And if we take Jesus seriously, if we're thoughtful about it, we'll look at the issue and go, nope, not worth it. Not worth putting myself on the line for this little thing that's going on. So Jesus, right out of the gate in dealing with judgment, he puts the yellow light on all of this. He says, now you slow down and think. You sure you want to get into the judgment business right here, right now? Because this is going to mean a lot for you. Now again, just because you're judging, it doesn't mean you'll be judged negatively. And that's one thing we need to realize together. The word judgment doesn't mean condemnation necessarily. In fact, in this little section, are we to entirely avoid making judgments? I wanted to point that out to you. In the Greek language that Jesus uses that word, in the Greek language it means separating. You're making a decision. So it could be in a courtroom, you're deciding innocent or guilty, but it could also be, in fact, that word was used when Paul decided not to stop at a certain spot. He made a judgment. I'm not going to stop there, So judgment as a word doesn't mean condemning anyone or assuming them guilty of some terrible thing. It just means you've come up with a decision. So here's how this looks when it comes to people. Let's say you meet a new person, you're trying to get to know them, you're trying to kind of gauge what kind of person they are. What kind of judgments do you quickly, without really thinking, without even wanting to, what kind of judgments do you usually come up with about people within the first 10 minutes of meeting them?
Whether you want to make a friend or not?
Yes, right. You're making a decision based on whatever information they're flowing at you. Yeah. What else do you decide about them?
What kind of lifestyle they live. You can tell just by, talking to somebody in the first 10, 15 minutes what kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, you can also, again, it doesn't mean you're right. It doesn't mean any of that. Your decisions change as you get to know people too. But my point is, you automatically do this with people. And you're not consciously wanting to. You even decide whether they're educated a lot of times. the way they speak, the vocabulary they use, the topics they focus on. Are they educated or not? You can even figure out sometimes whether they're a person with a moral compass or not. All this stuff.
And a lot of times you can figure out where their heart's at too, because usually what they talk about fairly openly is where their heart's at too.
That's true. What are you comfortable talking about? Yeah. Now again, this is where Jesus would be cautioning his disciples. And especially the conscious part of our minds, what he's saying is, now slow that down. Careful with that. Because you could be wrong, Now again, the judgment might be good or bad. That's the issue. That's the point I'm trying to make. Just because I've judged that you love music, so what? Who cares if I judge that? And if I'm wrong, who cares? But there are issues where we go deeper than that when we decide things about people. We've decided you're worth my time or not. Interesting, recently, Dewey and I happened to be in the office when someone called asking for help. So I went to help him, and he asked for more help when we got there. And so Dewey and I were talking about this whole issue of judgment. And this came up in that whole context. You're having to make some decisions about a person when they ask you to help them. Is their story reliable? If I help them, am I really helping them? Or am I kind of promoting a lifestyle that they shouldn't have? All those things. As a wise person, a mature person, I want to get that right. Now, if you take Jesus at verse 1, you're like, I shouldn't judge anything about anything, so of course I'll help you. But see, I've already made a judgment then that I should help you. You see the complexity of this. You can't just say, I won't judge then. Jesus said not to. Tough. You're stuck making judgments. So let's press into what is Jesus getting at when he says, don't judge others, knowing that you're going to be judged the same way. It seems to be more of a, now slow this down. Careful. Be careful with what you're doing on this judgment thing. Let's jump into the next section of what he said. This also needs some clarifying. I grew up hearing this, and I think I heard it wrong. Most of my life hearing people teach this. So let's see if we can get this figured out. Would somebody read 3 through 5 again?
Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye.
Now I think he's tightening it for us. He's zooming in the lens so we can see more what he's getting at. So in my bullet point, I put it this way. Jesus is teaching us to judge humbly. So first he teaches us to be hesitant, slow it down. Now he's saying, now be humble about it, knowing your own need for repentance and correction. And this is what I wanted to really talk through with you. What is Jesus getting at with this parable about specks and planks? Or some have logs. Some of your translation might say log. I think the old one said, what is it? Moat, some word that we don't use anymore. Big piece of wood, okay? And Jesus grew up under a carpenter. He totally gets this whole sawdust and plank thing. Now, here's how I grew up hearing this. And this is religious people and non-religious people saying this. Non-religious people love this section, by the way, because it tells them that no one can judge them. Since you have issues in your life that you haven't figured out yet, you shouldn't be trying to deal with anyone else's problems, right? And the implication of what Jesus says is your problems are bigger than theirs are. Now, on the surface, that sounds quite enlightened, Yeah, you're right. I should handle my own business before I poke my nose in other people's business. Hurrah, And that seems to go very well with what he said at the first thing. Don't judge. Keep your nose out of other people's business. Well, the more you learn from what Jesus and the apostles teach, that doesn't quite fly in the kingdom. Because being disinterested in other people's lives doesn't work very well in the kingdom. Now, in the world system, you can totally shrug off everyone else's issues, and that's fine. But love can't do that. Love won't let you do that, right? So, what is he talking about? About the plank. Don't worry about the speck in their eye while you got a plank in your eye. I must admit, there was a long time where I had no idea what to make of the plank thing. Because in my brain, I knew this can't mean don't help people. It can't mean that. Jesus wouldn't say that. So does this mean I always have a bigger problem than the other guy? Well, that can't be right either. And finally, someone put the right word on it. And the more I thought it through, I thought, I think they're right. And what they said was, the plank is hypocrisy. The plank, think about the difference between the speck and the plank. When you get a speck in your eye, like it's a windy fall day, oh, can't wait, right? And it's blowing the stuff around, and you get some, oh man, you know what that's like, this little thing, and you're like, do you see anything? No, I don't see anything. Oh, it's in there, I know it is. And it irritates, but you can still see, and you just try to work up enough eye juice to get it flowing out of there. But you can still operate, it's just irritation. Now think about this ridiculous picture of what he says there about a log or a plank sticking out of your eye. This isn't just an irritation. You can't see anything here. It's blinding you completely. And the issue here seems to be, and again, look at the word he uses at the beginning of verse 5. You what? Hypocrites. And this, throughout this whole sermon, throughout his whole ministry, this is Jesus's pet peeve for people. Hypocrisy is the thing that he hates the most in everything he teaches. He hates it, can't stand it. Because hypocrisy is what keeps people from coming to him, from repenting, from finding healing in life and all those things. He didn't have a great deal of problem with people who were prostitutes, greedy tax collectors, the sinful folks, as long as they knew it and were willing to hear the message of the kingdom. All right, come on in, let's go. Remember what he said at the beginning of this sermon. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Not because it's great you're poor in spirit, because you can come on in. What is the one roadblock to people having the kingdom? It's hypocrisy. So here's what light popped on for me when someone pointed out what the plank must surely be. The problem is that when you are blind to your own issues, it's not just that it would be improper to help people. It's actually impossible. You're no good to anybody. If you're that blind that you can't even see your own need for correction and rebuke or, growth, not only would it seem silly for you to try to help somebody, you're probably going to mess it up. You're not going to be helpful to somebody, really. And boy, did I find this out. When I fell into that addiction to gambling soon after Christine and I got married, after the biggest part of that storm blew over, and I had been so humbled. I can't even tell you the notches I fell through that process. Holy mackerel. Talk about a hypocrite finding out who he really is. When I realized after all that was done was, I don't think God orchestrated it. I don't think God was happy with it. But I do know something God accomplished through it. He allowed me to be someone who could actually minister humbly to other flawed people. Because before that, if you asked me, do you have any flaws, Ryan? I would know the right answer is yes. But to be honest with you, compared to everyone else, no. Mine are so minor. Come on. After that experience, I would have such an answer to give you. Am I flawed? Well, how much time do you have? Oh my gosh. And I became aware of the fact through all of that mess, and I wish I didn't have to go through it, or that she didn't have to go through it, but through all that mess, I saw what this meant. I was oblivious to reality. And so how could I be helpful to anyone in their real problem? And I think I've mentioned this before, but if you were to talk to me about addiction previous to this, I would say, well, just stop. What's your problem? If you want it bad enough, you'll stop. Well, having gone through it, I realized, okay, so it's not that simple. Like slavery to sin is real. That's not just poetry. That's real. This thing called slavery. And so suddenly, my ability to reach out and help someone with their speck, I can actually do that now. Because I can see things clearly. Before, in my hypocrisy, the plank kept me from even seeing anything. And can you imagine when Jesus gave this little scenario? The people in the crowd must have smiled and looked at each other like, what is he talking about? Plank in the eye? This is silly. Serious teachers being silly all of a sudden. But I think he was being silly to make a point. And by the way, this extreme case he paints with the speck and the log, he does another extreme thing below with pigs and dogs, but we'll look at that in a second. I wonder if you would turn with me to Luke 6. Because Luke gives us a similar teaching there, but different. And that happens a lot. Oh, that's John. Matthew and Luke share a lot of the text of Jesus' teaching, but there's striking differences between their presentations of the same teaching. Would somebody read 37 through 42? Luke 6, 37 to 42.
Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. How far?
Oh, all the way to 42.
He also told them a parable. Can the blind guide the blind? Won't they both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, Brother, let me take out the speck that is in your eye, and you yourself don't see the log in your other eye? Hypocrite, first take the log out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck in your brother's eye.
So there's a lot of similarity, right? Also a lot of difference. And one reason I wanted to come here with you is to point out the blindness thing is brought up not just with the speck and plank thing, but in verse 39. Can the blind lead the blind? Won't they both fall into a pit? And isn't that the problem with hypocrisy? This is why Jesus, he was saying some harsh things about the Pharisees and teachers of the law, like he did a lot. And his disciples, I'm trying to picture this, and I think I can. They're watching Jesus say that in front of these people that he's ripping apart. And you can just sense the tension in the air and the discomfort, and they're like, oh man, this is rough. And they go to Jesus later and say, Jesus, don't you know you're offending them when you say this stuff? Duh. Of course he does. But here's what he says to them. He says, leave them. They're blind guides. And he says, any plant that my Father uproots, it will be destroyed. He calls them blind guides. Guess what he just said here in Luke 6? And what he's talking about, let's go back to Matthew 7 now. What he's talking about here is the tendency in those religious men and we religious folks to level our guns, especially our religious biblical guns, at people. And rather than apply God's truth first to our own lives and to see our need for it, we so quickly show how we're so much better than the world. And you say, well, don't you have issues? Yeah, but nothing like those people. Oh, look at them. Oh, they're horrible. And then we so many of us pick our favorite pet sin that we get to rail about, Some whole churches do this sometimes. The entire church has this one sin that, man, they can't stop talking about it. Those homosexuals, or those sexually immoral, or those, and if you're left-leaning churches, it's the corrupt, greedy corporations, or the CEOs, or whatever, It's the cops for some people. And so you pick on that one. But one of the really dangerous sins of this, focusing on other people's problem, where are your eyes not?
on yourself.
And isn't that lovely? When you get to dodge your own need to repent, to be still before the Lord, to see who you really are. Why bother with that when I can keep yelling about those people? By the way, I'm not helping them at all by yelling about it, but it gives me a way out of facing my own self. So Jesus is saying, do this humbly. Do it out of a recognition that I'm with you in needing correction. I'm with you in needing healing. I'm with you in needing to be more like Jesus than I am. And if you have a humble heart when you approach your brother or sister with the speck, go ahead and get the speck out of their eye. Now you can, because you're seeing now, And that's one of the dangerous things about the teaching I heard growing up. It almost led you to feel like you never would be qualified to help anybody, because you're still not perfect. Well, when will I ever be ready to help people if I have to wait for that, And here's the other issue. What if someone tries to help you and you say to them, yeah, but you've got your issue, so stay out of mine, Have you ever heard this? That also is an abuse of this text. If I'm waiting for you to be perfect to be able to help me, I'm on my own. Because even the pastor, that title and that education at that school did not make any of those people perfect, did not make any of them without their own issues. So who's going to help you? Well, God will help me. Right. And one of his most important ways of helping you is his church body. So if you shut them down because they're not perfect yet, you've said no to God as much as you've said no to that brother or sister, right? So we want to understand Jesus isn't saying don't point other people's issues out to them. What he's saying is just make sure you're clear on your own also. Don't be blind to your own faults. Doesn't mean you've cleared them up. It just means you're aware of them and you're working towards Christ-likeness yourself. The other point I want to make in verse 5 is that Jesus says you must love or judge lovingly. Notice the goal of getting the plank out of your eye was what? In verse 5.
So you can see better.
To do what?
To help your friend.
There it is, right? The goal isn't just me. He wants you to help the brother with the speck. He wants you to help the sister see better, to get the irritation out of their life. They want to be like Jesus. He says brother and sister for a reason. If they're in your community of discipleship and they need you to help them with this, can you see it? Can you help me? You want to, you should. He's not saying don't do it. He's just saying make sure you're the right frame of mind when you do. And by the way, this is a beautiful thing about being in the church life. As I come and help you become like Jesus, lovingly, wanting to help you, not wanting to point out how bad you are, not wanting to put you in your place or whatever, just at a genuine desire for your best, I can then, at the very same time that I'm trying to poke your eye to get that thing out, I can at the same time, when I'm done helping you, could you help me out? I'm struggling in this area. Can we do this together? See, this humility is the key to this whole issue of judgment. You can't help make judgments. It's the humility, it's the hesitancy, it's the love that Jesus is trying to call us to have. Now, this last section is also a doozy. And I actually think it's the weirdest and the hardest to wrap our heads around because of the way Jesus decided to say it. And it bothers me the way he said this, to be honest with you. And he has every right to say it the way he did. He knows what he's doing. But I must admit to you, when I read this, I'm really uncomfortable. Would somebody read verse 6 again?
Don't waste what is holy on people who are unholy. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. They will trample the pearls and then turn and attack you.
Now, the NIV here says, do not give dogs what is sacred. So Jesus, and this is, by the way, on the back of your page, a little blip about that, dogs and pigs. Jesus actually seems to be contradicting himself in my first reading of this. Because he starts by saying, don't judge. Because if you're harsh in judgment, judgment will be harsh on you, that kind of thing. And then he invites me as his disciple, it seems. He invites me to look at people as pigs and dogs. And don't waste your time on them. What the heck? Doesn't that seem like you just turned a corner on me? This is not the flow of the river I thought we were on here, Jesus. So this one threw me for a loop. Now, by the way, taken at face value, for a self-righteous hypocrite, this is gold, man. Yeah. Those dogs and pigs, I won't waste my time on them. I'm going to hang out with folks who are like me. That if you're that way, you can really like what it sounds like Jesus is saying here. Because it puts you above these dogs and these pigs. I have what's holy and you aren't worthy of it, But is that what he's getting at? Now, just because I don't like it doesn't mean that's not what he meant. I have to conform to what he said, not make it fit what I like. But if it sounds contradictory to what he said before, I need to wrestle with that. I need to figure out what's going on. Well, again, I tried to get other people's take on how could you possibly read this to fit his actual flow of thought. And one of the things that was pointed out to me is Jesus is shocking on purpose. He's a rabbi, right? A Jewish rabbi. Jewish rabbis, Jesus specifically, spoke in parables most of the time, which actually really annoyed his disciples to some extent, right? They said towards the end of Jesus' life, Master, if you would just speak clearly, I'm sure we'd understand you. You're always talking in these riddles and these comparisons, and which was a very rabbi thing to do. Which is one reason why I think a lot of Westerners don't like reading the Gospels as much as we like reading Paul's letters. Paul's much more straightforward writing to Greek people. Jesus is teaching Jewish people, so he uses this rabbi language. And we're like, I wish he would just say what he's trying to say. So one of the things to realize is he's using shocking language to awaken us to the importance of what he's saying. And when you use this kind of language of calling people, because you have to assume he's talking about people, right? He doesn't seem really that concerned with what you do with your dogs and your pigs here. Okay, so he's obviously speaking of how you deal with people. And he's shocking us to go, wait, what did you just say? Which, by the way, it worked, because that's what I'm doing. I'm like, wait, what? Who are you calling dogs and pigs? So he's almost like purposefully getting you to listen and think on this, because can you mean what you're saying? Here's the other thing to realize. Back in ancient Israel proper, dogs were not typically considered domesticated pets, okay? When you talk about dogs to the Jews in Israel, you were talking about wild animals. And they were unclean because they ate things that you don't want to deal with as a Jew, unclean things, In fact, domesticated dogs are pretty gross just by themselves, but so wild dogs are even worse. And dogs had this, you go back to Solomon, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool returns to his shame. Those things, like the picture, also Jezebel, her blood being licked up by dogs and all this stuff. Like, it's always this negative, unclean picture of dogs, okay? And then pigs, the deal with pigs, right? Like, that is the epitome of uncleanness to the Jew. Which is why one of the Greek one of the Greek rulers who had control over this land before Jesus came, he sacrificed a pig on the Jewish temple altar to defile it. He chose a pig well, if that was his goal. He chose the right animal to do it, right? Pigs are like the quintessential unclean animal. So think about it. Jesus picked those two animals. Of all the unclean animals he could have picked, he went for the jugular, so to speak, right? So what is he getting at then? Well, a wild dog and a pig have something in common. What do they really want from you? What does a wild dog and a pig really want from you?
Food.
Food. That's it, right? Give me food. Everything else, go away. I don't care about anything else. Pigs got their mud. They got their food. They're happy. Dogs, they got food. They're fine. They'll take care of themselves. So if a dog wants food, or if a pig wants food, and you come up to them and offer them whatever you think is valuable and important, a picture of your deceased mother, or a trinket from your childhood that really causes you nostalgia, something really important to you, and you take to the wild dog. I just want to share this with you. I think you really enjoy this. Notice what Jesus said about that. The dog is going to be quite upset that you don't have any food for it, and what will it do? Attack. It's going to shred up whatever holy thing you brought to them, and then be really mad at you, Well, if you won't give me food, you'll be my food. And the same thing with the pig. If you come up to a pig with pearls, I don't care about pearls. Look, if I can't eat it, forget it. But see, to you, the pearls are valuable. To you, the pearls are beautiful. To you. And I think we're getting to Jesus' point. See, to me, this item I'm bringing to the dog is sacred. To me, it is to be honored and hallowed. If I understand reality, I will therefore conclude that dog does not want it, okay? Because this is how I view it. The dog has no interest in sacred. And the same thing with pigs. The pig has no interest in pearls. And if I'm intelligent and if I use good judgment, which is an interesting spin on this whole thing, if I'm using good judgment, I know that. And the people listening to Jesus would, of course, be going, what a ridiculous scenario. Why would you even bring that up? Who's going to give sacred things to dogs? Who's giving pearls to pigs, Jesus? And I think this is his coded way of saying, isn't that ridiculous the way we are? Isn't it ridiculous how you deal with people? So I don't think he's giving anyone permission to look at others as dogs and pigs. Quite to the contrary, I think what he's pointing out is you aren't considering carefully a lot of times when you approach people what they think is important, what they think is needed right now, what will help them. You're so caught up in what you think about this stuff, you haven't even shown good judgment. And I was trying to think, how does that happen in everyday life? And a few examples came to mind. You might have others yourself. But have you ever seen it done, or maybe you were a participant in it? Someone has gone through a terrible time of loss, of pain. They're just really low. And people send cards or Facebook messages, or they come over and talk. And what they tell them is how everything's fine, have a stiff upper lip, it's all going to be okay. All these platitudes and greeting card statements that we make. God's in control. But what does that person really need right now?
Someone to listen.
Right? And if you want a good example of what Jesus is talking about with dogs and pigs, you go to the book of Job. Not that Job is a dog or a pig. That's what I'm saying. I don't think Jesus is really identifying people as dogs and pigs. He's just getting our attention. When Job's friends first showed up, what did they do? In his loss, in his deep woe and mourning, what did they do for him?
He just sat and listened.
Yep. Did you know it was completely quiet for like a week? Like that. Your first impression of these, speaking of judgment, my first judgment of these guys is that they are awesome friends. Who does this? You just go and sit with a guy on the floor, and they seem to be well-to-do from what you're reading. They're sitting on the dirt floor with their friend Job and saying not a word, just being there. Like, yes, good job, guys. Then when they start opening their mouths, what happens? Oh, I changed my judgment. You guys are awful. Because you remember, what do they do when they open their mouths? Do they offer him comfort, support? No, they say, Job, if you'd stop sinning, this would all get cleared up real quick. It's obviously your fault, Job, so just, repent of whatever your problem is. And they wouldn't listen to him. They argue with him instead of listen to him. Like, have you read through the book of Job? It's very frustrating. Oh my goodness. The story at the beginning is interesting. The rest of it is just frustrating. You're just mad at these people. All of them. They're all ridiculous. And this is what I think Jesus is getting at. When you seek to help people, whether they're mournful or they're in sin or they just need encouragement, whatever it is, I think what Jesus is trying to get us to realize is we mustn't only consider what we think is helpful, important, anything. We need to be considering, judging clearly, where are they? What do they think is needed? What do they think is helpful? By the way, I'm applying this in my own mind and heart to evangelism. Because I know what is sacred and I know what they need to find life, to find Christ. See? But I have to think to myself, where are they starting? You know, some people, as soon as the idea of religion comes up, they're like, you know, get away from me, creep. So am I even trying to understand who they are and what they think is important, what they think is worth talking about? See, because I could just come up to them and start talking about Jesus straight away, sin and hell and heaven, or however people approach it, and they're put off. And I could say to myself, well, they obviously just don't want it, and so they're going to suffer for that one. And I feel good about myself because at least I tried. But Jesus more and more is shaping my heart to say, yeah, I'm not sure you tried as well as you could have there, though. You took the easy road on that one. You decided what was important. You decided what to shove on them. And you excused yourself from all responsibility because, hey, they didn't want it. And I come back to this statement by Jesus and I said, it sounds like Jesus is saying don't bother. But I think what he's really saying is just be more thoughtful about it. If you want to help the dog, give him food, not a sacred object, If you want to help the pig, maybe don't bring some pearls along with you. He's not saying don't help them. He's saying help them in a smart way. Help them in a way that actually works, that helps. Which isn't to say the dogs or the pigs want what you have anyways, but at least, be thoughtful. And all of this ties together with his statement about judgment. Judgment cannot be based on me. It has to be based on someone or something beyond me. And this actually leads us to, I think, some of the meat and potatoes of this whole topic, which is something I think we're all interested in working through. In our world of diversity, there's your politically correct word. In our world of diversity, what the heck do we do when we have two callings that seem to be at odds? Our first calling is to lovingly be involved in fallen people's lives so that we can manifest the goodness of God to them. Right? Like, we can't just withdraw from the non-believers' lives or else they're stuck. They got nothing. So consider Jesus' way of life. He's the best example of how to live out these tensions. When Jesus came on his mission to seek and save the lost sheep of Israel, did he hole himself away in a holy place and wait on people to come to him? Separate himself from those unclean people because I'm holy and I need to stay that way, I don't want to catch their sin cooties. No, he went into homes at a table, which it's still true today, but even more so then. That was a sign of fellowship. It was a sign of relationship. You go in someone's home and eat with them, a meal. Now, he did this with really uptight, self-righteous people because he wanted to call them to repentance too. But he also, do you remember the guy Zacchaeus? Mm-hmm. Dirty. Bad. Levi/Matthew and all of his buddies. He went and spent time with these people on purpose, knowing their lifestyle. And he wasn't afraid of getting their sin cooties because he was there and he said so because he got flack for it. Do you remember? What was the criticism about Jesus going and having meals with these people? You can't do that. You're a rabbi. You can't go into unclean places and participate in unclean people's lives. And his response was so confident and powerful. He said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor. It's the sick. I didn't come to call the righteous, but the unrighteous. What good am I doing anyone if I stick with the people who are fine, So on the one hand, we know that that's a part of our calling. We're the light of the world. We're the salt of the earth, right? And light only does its work when it's not under a bowl. He taught us all these things. On the other hand, we are meant to be holy people, separate from the world, in it, not of it. Amen? Like we have Old and New Testaments, the calling to come out from among them, touch no unclean thing. So, this is a weird tension we've got. Live in the world amongst their people to bring them light and truth, but remain distinct, remain apart from them in your lifestyle, in your values, and all that. Ooh, this is heavy calling, y'all. This is not... I think most Christians would like to do one or the other. And depending on which Christian is which they prefer. Some people actually very genuinely would love to become monks or nuns. Not fully, but you know what I mean? Like just hide themselves away in a religious setting and just be safe. Away from it all. It's so gross out there. Other people actually enjoy the company of non-believers and what they do, and so they might enjoy just being a presence with the sinful. But if either side ignores the second side of the coin, we fail our calling. We can't be helpful. So here's why I think Jesus' words here and the words of the apostles later help us. What do we do in a culture where, and I'm going to pick the one that is just in the news, in the headlines. It's not because it's the only one or the biggest one, but what do we do about homosexuality? When Jesus says don't judge, does that mean we don't judge anything about homosexuality? Does that mean we don't judge the people who engage in that lifestyle? What does this mean, the teaching of Jesus about judgment, when it comes to a homosexual person or the homosexual community? This we got to work out. Now, we can obviously say, well, it's wrong, and here's the scriptures that tell you so. And by the way, we need to be aware of that, don't you think? We need to have clarity about the issue. How are we going to help the world know the truth of God if we're not clear ourselves? So that's good. And if you don't know the texts are, it's good to have that in mind. You don't want to just say the Bible said so. And they're like, oh yeah, what did it say? The Bible said so. Okay. So we want to be educated, informed what God's Word is on the matter. So I guess you could say we make a judgment about the lifestyle. What's that?
Not the person.
Okay, so let's work this through, because this is a tricky one for a lot of folks. What does it mean to judge someone's lifestyle or action without judging them? You know, okay, we talk about hate the sin, not the sinner. We say that, and I think we mean it.
It's the same as a little kid, you know. They'll do something wrong, and you can look at them and say, I love you. I just don't like your actions. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of separating it.
Yeah, so let's dig a little deeper in that, because I think you're spot on. And looking at it in lens of a kid is really helpful, because we all know you love them. Darn it, you just you love them. So think about if you've had kids, grandkids maybe currently, or you taught kids, however it was. When you saw little ones, what is it that you hate about that action that's bad? What is it that causes you to hate it so much? It might depend on what it is. Let's say they are older, and I know there are some situations like this, and they're caught up in drugs. Right? That's real. That's going on. What is the dynamic of making judgment here that's loving, that's humble, that's helpful?
It's harmful to them.
That's a judgment, isn't it? I've decided that. I've come to that conclusion. So what is the line? Or how does it look in relationship with this person to not judge them, but to judge that action, that lifestyle? What does it look like when you live life with them? To judge someone's behavior / decision making, but not condemn them, or however you put that. So does this mean that you don't spend time with them? That you don't provide for them anymore? Like I've talked to parents that have this real struggle. Like, I don't want to support them in this. I want to show them my protest, but I don't want to kick them out in the street because then they'll probably die. You know, like, what do I do here? I really love them, but I can't stand what they're doing. You know, and that's an extreme case, of course, but this happens in friends' lives. I've wrestled with this too. I have friends who I really care about and I want the best for them. But man, they keep up with this lifestyle. I don't know if I can continue on in friendship and have a good conscience about it, because I feel like I'm saying it's okay that they're this way. You know, this is a real issue. If you're engaged in any way with unholy people, this is something we've got to get figured out.
Because you think you're condoning their actions.
That's right. And neither do I want to be the person that every time I'm with them, I'm just telling them how wrong they are. I don't want to be that guy either. But I don't want to be silent, because then it's kind of like giving them a pass. So, what do we do here?
But isn't that why we, by our actions, by showing them compassion, being humble to them, we're showing them what they could have also.
Yes.
By our actions, giving them what they need to a point,
Yes.
So I think we still need to do that, but at the same time, we're not agreeing with what they're doing, but we're still supporting them, I guess, spiritually, but
Yeah. So let's review, I think, the core concept of all this, which is, what does it mean to love? What's your definition of love? I've given you mine before, but it doesn't mean it has to be yours. But how do you define love?
Being there for that person no matter what.
Okay.
Caring for their well-being.
Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way I've come to define it is pursuing someone's best. And so that looks like a lot of different things in different situations. But you have to make a judgment as to what is their best. That's the tricky thing about love. If you have no idea what's their best, you can't pursue that, You're just kind of floating along. So this is why I think love is so key to this whole conversation. In my understanding of what's best for you, child, grandchild, friend, whatever, spouse, it's best for you to walk away from this way of life. It's best for you to give up homosexuality, drugs, greed, gossiping, you name it. It's best for you. It's going to be the full life for you. Just like you said, the full life that I want for you so bad. It's just best for you. Now, how am I going to help that person find that best if I abandon them? In what role can I play in pursuing their best interest by just saying, I'm done? Get out of here. I don't want to see you again. On the other hand, am I pursuing their best by acting like all's well and ignoring the issue? So if you go to the doctor and they do the x-rays and they find that growth, the doctor has to make a judgment call. It's either going to hurt you or it's benign. It's fine. No problem. Now, in the doctor's judgment, if they find it's best that we remove that thing, you're really hoping the doctor doesn't say, I don't want to really bother with that. I've got other things I'd rather do. See ya. Neither do you want him to never tell you that it's in there and that it's going to kill you. You want a doctor who's wise and loving enough to say, here's the situation, here's what I want to do to help you. So I'm trying to think, now that's easy. You go to the doctor for that. I don't go to my friend to tell me what's wrong with me. So, maybe that's not as clear-cut a picture. But here's what I'm thinking. If we, as disciples of Jesus, are clear about our primary identity, which is disciples of Jesus, and that's why I say that every Sunday. I want us to be on that same page, if it's biblical, which I think it is. My primary identity in my life, above parent, grandparent, friend, spouse, above any of these, is disciple of Jesus. So, if that's true, my friendship has to look like discipleship towards this person. Not only my being a disciple to Jesus, but my wanting them to be also. So if I love them, I might have to have the tough conversation. And this is where I admit my own failures. I think a lot of us would probably say similarly. I know the conversation I could and should have. The right time hasn't come, or the right opportunity, which is always my out.
It's not the perfect time.
Yeah, just not yet. And you're like, well, when will it be? No idea, but just not yet, But we might have to, in love, say to them, it's a conversation of both things. I wish I could tell you how much I love you. You're so important to me. This relationship matters so much to me. And that's why it's so hard for me to see you doing these things. Because here's what I know from what Jesus has told me. I know he's right. I know what he's saying is right. So as I see you live the way you are, it just breaks my heart. And I wish I could do something to help you see what he's saying is so true. You can have so much more than you have, in this lifestyle. That kind of conversation. Now, once that conversation happens, it's totally in this person's hands what they do. Totally. They'll either see it as sacred and want it, or they'll say it's not food and get out of here with it. So what happens now? I did the hard thing. I had the conversation, and they said, I'll think about it, or you're crazy, or gee, thanks. Whatever they say about it. The next time we see each other, this could be very awkward. So now what? See, these are things I think through, because I have this situation in my life, and I have to, gosh, Jesus, what are you calling me to do here? Don't judge, get the speck out of their eye, pearls and pigs, all this stuff. It has to look like something. Jesus wasn't really one to just philosophize. He's saying, you are my disciples. This is the kingdom way to live in this world. And so maybe you're like me. You're trying to figure out, what does that even look like in relationship with people? But again, the identity I have as a disciple of Jesus, his call to love, those two things are going to guide everything that follows. Everything. That's the rudder. So what I'm about to do, is it loving? Is it for their best? Disregarding what I'm comfortable with, disregarding what I would rather, what is going to help them have the best? And the other is, what is it I can do to manifest Jesus' way to them in a way that's accurate and loving and good, and an invitation, not a demand? And that's one thing I noticed about Jesus interacting with sinful people. He invited them into something. He didn't yell at them. The people he yelled at, by the way, who did he yell at? He did yell. Yeah, oh man. Because they already knew the invitation. They said no. So he's like, all right, let's kick this up a notch. Time to get some passion, But when it came to Zacchaeus, it came to Matthew, these other people, it was an invitation. You can have so much more. And he would tell them what it is. And in the case of Zacchaeus, he said, you're right. This money thing has had my heart too long. I'm going to pay back what I owe plus 4 times as much. Wow. So these are the things that... This is why I've said what I've said before. We are disciples of Jesus, not the Bible. Because if we just are students of the Bible, we'll have looked at this section, check it off the list, move on with our lives. I studied that Bible portion. If I'm a disciple of Jesus, I'm thinking, oh, Master, what are you getting me into here? Oh, what does he want me to do? What does this look like in the mission you're on? See, a person is far more demanding than a book is. Words on a page. This is a person, Jesus coming to us and saying, are you hearing me? Are you hearing what I'm saying? I wanted to show you a few other passages that are helpful to study. We can't get into all of them today. I want to make sure you could write them down for later study, because I'm hoping you're going to wrestle through these things like I have to. How to really live this out in our fallen world. If you need a pen, I've got some. But first of all, Romans 2. You want this? Yeah. Romans 2, 1 through 4 is a pretty potent section about this. And I mentioned it before, but just to remind you, one reason why the epistles are so powerful is they take what Jesus taught and did, and the apostles have had time to simmer in those juices of who Jesus was and what he said and did. And then the apostles are watching churches, real people, in community together, facing real sin issues. They're watching it happen. And so what the epistles represent is the apostles' way of saying, here's what Jesus said and did, and how to apply it to your real life issue. The epistles are taking Jesus' teachings and like streamlining it to the needs of real people and real situations. That's why I love the epistles. There's more to them than that, but that's a big part of it. So, consider what Paul says in Romans 2, 1 through 4 then, based on what Jesus just taught. Would somebody read that? We're not going to dig in real deep just because of time, but I still want to read it together. Romans 2, 1 through 4.
You therefore have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else, for at whatever point you judge another, you are condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things. Now we know that God's judgment against those who do such things is based on truth. So when you, a mere human being, pass judgment on them and yet do the same things, do you think you will escape God's judgment? Or do you show contempt for the riches of his kindness, forbearance, and patience, not realizing that God's kindness is intended to lead you to repentance?
So here we face the question of, now who are you to be judging, folks? And I love his statement, God's judgment is based on truth. One of the issues we didn't really explore together, but judgment is interesting in that good judgment, requires information. Isn't that true? Like when you're in a court of law, you're supposed to present the case. You're supposed to bring the facts to the table so that the judge and the jury can consider the facts and come up with a good decision, a good judgment. Well, obviously, God has the corner on that market of information. He knows the whole deal. He knows the motive. He knows the actual circumstances. He knows what was done. He doesn't have to rely on hearsay. He's a witness to it all. So when God makes judgments, Paul's point is absolutely spot on. When God makes a decision, you can trust his decision. He's got all the pertinent information to make a good ruling on it. What's different about us? We don't have all the information. And we hardly ever even try to have all the information. And think about, and we were talking about this yesterday, and man, this hit home for me. In a court of law, how valuable is hearsay?
Not allowed.
Why is that? Think about the logic in a courtroom for why you don't accept hearsay. And then think, then why is that generally what we operate on in our day-to-day lives with people? How often do we really get the skinny from the person himself when something comes up? Now, we would hate to see that happen in a courtroom, especially if we're on the defense seat. Yet we seem to have no problem. We think it's perfectly logical to rely primarily on hearsay when drawing conclusions about other people. And you realize what Paul says is true. I don't usually have enough information to rely on my judgment about this person or this situation. You know? I came into the church just in January, and a lot had happened leading up to our coming here. And I don't mind. People want to fill me in on what happened, but I came in understanding whatever version of what happened before I got here I'm hearing, I have to assume there's more to it than I'm hearing. And that's okay. I'm not going to expect any one person to give me all that happened and everything. But see, I had to have it in mind, or I would have drawn a lot of conclusions real quick, because everyone, well, if you said it, that must be that way. And then what's really interesting is when I hear two different versions that are disagreeing with each other. Okay. Both of them are convinced that that's exactly what happened. Well, sure. But that's how we are as humans. Perspective changes things. The angle you saw it from, right?
No, it's even just like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They saw Jesus.
Excellent example.
Angles.
You're right. Exactly. None of them are wrong, but they're not full and complete either. One at a time. That's right. So I just really appreciate what Paul says here, and it's a good warning. It's the same thing about the plank. Are you blind to your own issues? You don't even see it, but you can see it in them. By the way, have you ever heard it said that whatever you see the most in others is probably what's in you? Like, why are you seeing that in everybody? What's your deal? Another important text is Romans 14. The whole chapter. I really do hope you'll take time to read that chapter sometime soon. Again, it's a real situation in the real church in Rome, the city of Rome. And the issue was, real, genuine disciples of Jesus had very strong convictions about a particular issue, but they disagreed about it. Like, really strong convictions, but they're not the same conviction. Now, the problem was, Jesus and the apostles did not give a clear answer about the issue of eating this particular kind of food. So now what? I'm convinced that the God wants it this way. She's convinced God wants it the other way. And there's no authoritative word to settle the issue. Now what? And so Paul gives them the now what. He tells them how to handle it. And so much of it is based on judgment. He said, don't judge your brother or sister who disagrees with you on an issue that is not clear from Jesus or his apostles. If they didn't make it clear, you cannot force your viewpoint on anyone else and judge them because they're different than you. So you can probably think of a lot of gray issues, we call them, gray issues in your life as a disciple, where there's no clear word from God or Jesus or the apostles about it. But you have a real strong feeling about this. For instance, political. There's no verse about Democrat or Republican, right? And so I've met people, if they encountered a Christian who called himself a Democrat, they questioned whether they could be a Christian. How can you be a Christian and be a Democrat? I don't understand. Democrats, I've known Democrats who are similar. How can you go along with so much of what Republicans do and call yourself a Christian? What's the matter with you? And then there's some people like, how can you wear either of those labels and call yourself a Christian? They're all crooks, And Paul's point is, you need to have a clear conviction from the Lord about your own life as his servant, and you leave the other person to do the same. You do not get to judge your brother or sister based on your own standard. It's not God's standard, it's yours. So don't you judge them. And I love the statement he makes here in verse 14:4. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? Exactly. In the church body, we have one master. So for me to act like I'm your master by telling you you're wrong because you're not doing what I said, oh, gross, no way. And I love what he says next. To their own master, servants stand or fall, and they will stand. For the Lord is able to make them stand. This is not just between you and your brother or sister. This is between you, your brother and sister, and the master. So tread lightly. Isn't that back to what Jesus said? Don't judge, or you'll be judged. Be hesitant when you judge. 1 Corinthians 5, the whole chapter, is another crucial section. Man, I wish you had more time to dig into that one. And actually, of all of them, this might be one of the most critical for our conversation about dealing with sinful people and judging them. 1 Corinthians 5. And I just want to read the last section with you. And you really should look at the whole thing for context. But notice what he says in verse 9 forward. 1 Corinthians 5:9. I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. Now that sounds like avoid those bad people in the world, right? It sounds like that. And that's apparently what they thought he meant. So he's clarifying now. He said, not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral or greedy, swindlers, idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. I love it. He's so smart. And he's really cutting down to the quick of this whole issue. He said, I'm not saying stay away from all wicked people, or you'd have to leave this planet. No, that's not the issue. Here's what he's saying. I'm writing you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral, greedy, idolater, slanderer, drunkard, swindler. Don't even eat with those people. See, in Paul's mind, and he goes on to say, we have to judge those in the church about things Jesus has said. Not things he didn't say. That's 1 Corinthians. That's Romans 14. But he said, if they're clearly sinning and stubbornly sinning and willfully sinning, the church has to judge them. In the authority of Christ, the church has to judge that and deal with it. And he even says, kick them out of the church, expel them. This doesn't mean every time you mess up, the church kicks you out. It's that you have been faced with your sin, you've been called to leave it aside, and you won't. He said, okay, you can't associate with them. You can't give them the feeling that all's well in my sin. I can have the church, Jesus, and my sin. He said, no. In fact, so let me read the last two verses. What business is of mine to judge those outside the church? Oh, that's one to keep in mind. What business is of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside, though? God will judge those outside. Leave that to Him. You expel the wicked person from among you in the community of disciples. Oh, that's heavy, but we're going to leave that one there. 1 Corinthians 6, 1 through 11 is another good one. And then finally, and that one's about how the church should be able to judge things without taking each other to court. And he's basically saying, don't you have people in your church wise enough to settle disputes? Why do you have to go to wicked people in courtrooms? Can't you handle this inside your church community? That was 1 Corinthians 6, 1 through 11. Talking about judgment, good judgment. The last one is James 4, 11 and 12. I just want to read those to you before we finish. This will be our last thing here. And if you're familiar with James's writing, he is a no-nonsense kind of guy. A lot of people like James because he just punches you in the face and walks away. He gives it to you straight. He doesn't even give you a spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. He says, brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you aren't keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who's able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? You know, this is like 2 verses, but pow, pow, right? He gives it to you. So James 4, 11 and 12. I hope you're just going to kind of pore over these different sections, because it's hard to operate in this world as a mature disciple without this perspective from Jesus and His apostles. We really need to figure out what they're telling us to do about this stuff. We don't want to withdraw. We don't want to abandon people to their sin, but neither do we want to promote it in their lives. So how do we judge well, knowing that the way we judge is how we're going to be judged too? My goodness. Any thoughts or questions or musings about this issue?
Ryan, how do you feel about Christians getting involved in politics?
I think it's necessary.
Okay, like Frank and Graham.
Yeah.
You know.
Because as disciples of Jesus, we realize that He didn't come just to affect the spiritual world. He came into the real human society. And we've actually seen the results of Christians who take Jesus' kingdom vision seriously. Not trying to make this old earth the kingdom. We can't do that. But we can see the kingdom of God have its effect in this old fallen world. So for instance, slavery's end in Britain and in America. The issue of women being oppressed and suppressed more than the scriptures ever called for, those things. Things of races, like equality of different kinds for people that are all made in God's image. A lot of these things, if Christians did not enter into politics, speak intelligently and competently the truths of Jesus to persuade others, a lot of stuff would never get done. You know? And in fact, I think that the main concern I have about it is that we try to legislate righteousness, which never works. Oh my goodness. And that's the danger. That's the main danger I see with Christians entering politics. You get caught up, you get intoxicated with the idea that if I pass the right number of laws, I'll make the world better. And you can quickly ignore what the scriptures reveal is that laws don't change people, because the heart is the issue, not outward performance. So I think that's the danger Christian politicians need to keep in mind. But as long as they're being wise about that, they can do a whole lot of good. I also think we need to really lift them up in prayer, because, man, that machinery will chew you up as a disciple of Jesus. And compromise is so easy, you know. That's how the good old boys taught me. I have to do it if I want to get anything done around here. Gotta compromise. Just gotta give in, you know. And so to be a heart and soul follower of Jesus in politics is like so important, but I really pity the people who try, you know. Like, God bless you and may He uphold you, because, wow, that's hard. As long as we're clear on what the role of the disciple is in this world, we can do so much good in politics. As soon as we start confusing that, I don't know, we give people reason to resent Christians and resent the theocracy. You are trying to force me to be like, no, that's not a good idea either. So. Yeah, the other danger I see for Christians is the withdrawal. This world's going to burn anyway, so let the devil have it. I'll just hang on until Jesus comes, because that's when everything's going to get better. You're like, well, why did Jesus come then? Like, He obviously wanted to affect this old earth while it's still here, you know. So, yeah, there's always two extremes and dangers that we find ourselves in. Any thoughts about that one? That's a good question. Any disagreements even? You can disagree with me.
I think there's too many Christian leaders that aren't stepping up, because they're just, like you say, sitting back and saying, well, I don't want to make waves, or I don't want to become persecuted or whatever.
Yeah.
They have a huge following, you know, big arenas, and they're filled every day, and they're just sitting back and not being public about their belief and their faith, and they're just letting things go. And I think that's destroying us, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to think carefully. What does it mean to be salt of the earth? Or what does it mean to be light of the world? And it's not primarily political, but it includes that. It has to, because that's a part of life.
It's your moral standing.
Yeah. Everything that's a part of normal human life must be touched by the gospel, if the gospel is what we think it is. It has to be. Because remember, the gospel's goal is the heart, and what is affected by the heart? Everything we touch. Everything we touch. That includes politics, you know. I was at a picnic the other day, and politics came up. And right away someone was like, come on, you don't discuss politics or religion, you know. You don't do that. But on the other hand, you think, but that's such a big part of who people are. To treat it like it's hands off, it's kind of silly. So what are we left with? Movies and the weather? I mean, what do you want to talk about? So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic we have. If we can be loving when we do it, right? You can be a real jerk trying to convince people you're right.